Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of the Diamond Hands podcast. Today we are so excited to have a very special guest with us. We have Emma Wedgwood, and she is the founder of Emma Wedgwood Aesthetics, and she is from across the pond. So our second guest from across the pond. She has two locations, and she's a recognized safety advocate, an expert trainer, and expert trainer in the industry. And she's also the creator of her business, and also she has a business that is a pro bono initiative to work with women who are actually in active recovery. And she has her own story about that. And so today we really want to focus on like the power of the human spirit, resilience, and like coming back after a downturn. And I think so many people, mental health is no longer a big stigma as it used to be, right, Emma? And we're coming into a time where more and more people are saying it's totally okay for me to actually reach out and get help. So welcome.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me, Leslie. I'm excited to be here.
Same. I fell in love with Emma's story after like reading some of her posts on LinkedIn, and I was like, oh my goodness. I was like, our audience needs to hear her story. So, Emma, if you could just like take us back a little bit and tell us a little bit more about your background, how you got into nursing, in the first place. Like, so let's go back in some of those times.
Okay, way back, way back. Um, so I got into nursing. Actually, originally I started out as a dental nurse and I did that for a few years. And then
Okay.
I was working in an outpatients department in a hospital in what we call a GDH, it's a general district hospital. So it's on the suburban parts of London rather than on the big central London ones. And I just got to know all the staff there. And one of the matrons at the time, she said, Emma, why don't you think about doing your training? And I was like, oh, I don't know.
Mm.
Go on, do it. I think you find that you'll enjoy it, and you can, it opens a few more doors for you. And I was like, okay. So I did. So that was the start of me getting into my nurse training, and I was lucky that someone sort of, showed me that that was possible, because I didn't think that was possible for someone like myself. And so she kind of helped me, coax me into the idea that this might be something that I wanted to do. And I went and did my training, and I picked the school of nursing that I wanted to do, which was St Bartholomew's. It was one of the prestigious ones, and so I set my sights. I was like, that's where I want to go, and I got myself there. So yeah, that was the beginning.
I mean, so just tell us a little bit more about that belief. And I know so many people think that about themselves. It's like you didn't feel that you deserved to be there. Or you're like, wow, someone like me can do this. Tell me more about where that early kind of limiting belief came from.
Yeah, good question. I think that's something that I've lived with probably all my life, and it's probably held me back
Yeah.
a lot of my life in terms of my progress, in terms of my achievements, in terms of, just not really doing or feeling like I can do the things that I'm actually able to do, because the self-limiting belief and the narratives are all there, and they have been alive and kicking for, like I said, the majority of my life. And I think it mostly stemmed from childhood. And I know it sounds like a little bit of a psychobabble BS, but actually I'm a firm believer that there's a lot in the fact that, our childhood, our environment, our parents, that really is the thing that shapes us. And that's kind of, we take that through with us into adulthood. I think, my mum, I had a difficult relationship with my mum. I didn't know this at the time. I didn't really fully understand things. And my mum was a narcissist. She could be sometimes not very nice. And so the dialogue at home was around me not being particularly smart, or not being, somebody who was going to amount to much. So, lots of sort of rhetoric around that stuff. And of course, that gets in there, right? You hear that enough times, it gets in. There's no way that can't. And so I also went to boarding school, and so I think, I think as well, I had ADHD. I think, didn't know that in the day. I'm 51, Leslie, so we didn't talk about these things back then. As you just touched on in your intro, we now openly speak about mental health in all different guises. And back then I didn't even know what that was. And so I was a bit sort of, looking out the window, not paying attention. So my school teachers were a bit like, oh, almost a bit of a write-off. Do you know what I mean? I was somebody who wasn't, deemed to be going places in life. I wasn't going to be this, I wasn't going to do much more than maybe be a typist. And so somebody suggested that I do some typing lessons to make sure that I didn't stack shelves. Yeah, honestly, this is no joke. I know. So when I didn't finish my sixth form is like, the bit you do just before you go to university, and I didn't quite finish because I was in boarding school, and lo and behold, I'd started drinking. We've got drinking on a weekend at a party, and I didn't return home in time, so I got in a lot of trouble, and I was kicked out of school, so I didn't finish my sixth form A levels, we call them. And so then I was like, oh God, it felt like it was a disaster. I was never going to be able to do anything professional. But I think, yeah, that was the real beginnings of this idea that anything professional or worthy was for somebody else or other people, but not something that was necessarily going to be for me.
It's so interesting you say that. I mean, it's like I remember I was talking with another guest of mine, and we were talking about what we call those voices. We call them mixtapes,
Yeah.
right? And it's just like there are tapes that are running in the background of every human being, and it's like, and at some point, and you've done it, and this other person that I know has done it, and we've done it. It's just like it's a matter of sometimes you have these voices, these things that are, and it's like, but at what point do you say, okay, enough is enough? And many times it's that rock bottom when it's like that's the opportunity. And we'll talk about that in a minute to kind of recreate that mixtape and make it your own tape, even if it's playing, but it's a little bit less loud, right?
Right.
So when you got into school, you've talked about nursing culture. We're working where you we're like working hard and drinking hard were almost like the same thing. And how much did that environment kind of bring you into that kind of collapse before the rise?
Yeah, I think there's definitely a correlation between the job, the drinking, and perhaps subconsciously why I chose this profession. There's all these other things that are going on. I think, they were all at play, and I just didn't really know that. I didn't understand all of these things, of course, because, nobody really spoke about these things. And I think that, yeah, I chose a high acuity area to work in, so it was fast paced, lots going on. My sort of attention span wasn't really able to deal with something that was slower or a desk job. I knew that I would never be suited to doing anything admin. And still today, admin, don't give me admin. I want to kill myself. Do you know what I mean?
Yes.
So then we had a very big unit. The one that we worked on was the biggest trauma unit in London, and we saw all the very, the really serious cases, anything from shootings, stabbings, and some really horrific accidents. So there's a lot of stuff that you're seeing on a daily basis that's actually quite a lot to deal with. We had no support psychologically.
Yeah.
Nobody thought about the fact that as staff members, you might want to talk to somebody professionally about what you were dealing with. And so I think what we did in our sort of muddled fashion was we got together and we got drunk. We would go out after a shift. We would let off steam. We would debrief on our own way because we didn't know how else to do it. Talk about the day, get really hammered, and then do it all over again the next day. So I think it was a relief in a way. There was some kind of outlet. We didn't know that's what it was at the time, but looking back, I think that's what we were doing.
Yeah, and I can see how that kind of contributes, right? And it's just like, we talk about like life infrastructure, right? And it's just a matter of like who you surround yourself with, what you're looking at every day. That energy rubs off on us. And so like if you have even a small proclivity for
Yeah.
something, it's very easy. I think people underestimate just how easy it is to go from I'm dabbling to full blown, full blast into something, right?
100%. It's like, and there's a couple of points in there that I want to sort of respond to. One is that, we find people that suit the things that we want to do. So, it's very easy to attract in, or, you be attracted to the kinds of people that are doing the sorts of things that you're doing. So they're enabling your behavior, and we're all okaying it. What we're all doing is going, this is fine, nothing to see here. We're not doing anything that's, abnormal or, or not in our best interest. So you kind of go along, and it's kind of that a little bit of culture within a few of you. So I think
Yeah.
that makes it a bit easier to deal with, because we all were hungover and we all went out drinking and we all did this. So it didn't feel like anybody, or me in particular, was standing out as being odd or being the one that was, only behaving like that, or being particularly
Mhm.
different from the rest of the group. And then the other part
Mhm.
of that, I think, is there's a line, right? There's a line that you go up
Yeah.
to, and then in my case, I crossed over the line, and I don't remember when I crossed over the line.
Yeah.
It all gets so
Ooh.
blurry. Everything kind of, you're going along
Mhm.
in this kind of yep, 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 and then you throw some other things into the mix. For me, I got married to somebody, my first husband, who wasn't a particularly kind man, was also a narcissist. I sort of, again, I'm
Mhm.
very drawn to that given my childhood experience.
Yes.
Unfortunately, he was abusive as well. So I kind of had all this other stuff going on, and you're trying to sort of keep a lid on it,
Mhm.
and, trying to sort of just function as something. But now there's lots of other things for you to try and manage. And so the booze becomes even more accelerated.
Yes, it makes so much sense, and so with that, it's just like, this is the last thing we'll touch on before we kind of go back into like how do you get out of it, right? It's just like at one point you almost lost your nursing
Yeah.
license,
Yeah.
suspended,
Yeah.
blood tests, all things. Tell us about that story. I know you said that's the thing, these little tiny what they call, there's a saying they call it
Yeah.
death by paper cuts, right? And it's
Yeah.
just like these little tiny things. We don't understand how they're adding up to create a result in one way or another, right? And so tell me about that period that you went through. And was that the catalyst
Mm.
for you? Tell me
Yeah.
more.
So it was terrifying, is the first thing to say.
Yeah.
I remember, there's a rock bottom with a lot of people when whatever your addiction, your drug of choice, if you like, whatever, if for those people that hit rock bottom, whatever that is, there's a moment where you just go, well, for me, I was like, oh God, this is about as bad as it gets. My outlook on life suddenly seemed
Mm,
really bleak. I realized that I'm
mhm,
at a fork, I'm at a junction in my life where I can continue, but I knew in my heart and in my brain that was semi functioning at this point that that didn't look pretty. And I probably didn't want to go down that road. I sort of did, but I sort of
yeah.
didn't. I didn't know how to, I knew I didn't want to, but I also didn't know how to not go down it as well. So it was a confusing one. And the part of the voice that
Mhm,
just says, oh, who cares? Go on, doesn't matter. That's still quite loud at that point.
yeah.
But I knew enough to know, oh, actually, you do want to claw this back. And at this point, obviously, the painful disciplinary process had already begun. I had that moment at work where I had arrived unfit for duty and was taken
Mhm,
into the office and told, we think you're unfit for duty, we think you're inebriated. And that is, oh, that to hear those words is just like I didn't know what to do with myself. But around that as
mm,
well is shame, is, this
yeah.
enormous sense of failure. How did I get here? What's going on? How have I allowed this to happen? Because, as I sort of mentioned, it is a
Mhm,
progressive thing. But
yeah.
so it's
Yeah.
not like one day you're not and one day you are. But I don't remember at what point I decided that, well, it's not a conscious decision, remember, but at what point did this become okay? How have I allowed to get myself
Mhm,
into this specific situation? And so I think, obviously, when that happened, that was reported to the NMC. That's our governing, the nursing midwifery body in the UK. And obviously, that was investigated quite rightly, as it should be. And after a couple of months of all of that stuff kicking in, I remember thinking, okay, this is it now. There are no other, the denial is so strong initially. The denial keeps you in a
yeah.
place that stops you from being able to look at what is actually happening in reality. The mechanism of the
Mhm,
denial is to keep you safe, right? It's designed to try and sort of protect you. And so it took a while for me
Mhm.
to pop my head up and go, oh my God, this is actually happening. I am going to have to deal with this. And so, after going through all of these initial investigations with, serious people and authorities, I realized, okay, this is actually, if I'm not careful, this is really not going to end well. And I remember one of the RCN, that's the Royal College of Nursing, that's our another one of the professional bodies that we have, our union. I don't know if you have unions in the US, I think you do. And the legal person that was
Yeah.
representing me said, I don't think this looks good for you, Emma. I think you're going to get struck off. And I was like, oh, it was a real moment. Sometimes in life, somebody will say something to you that lands, and that did. And I was
Mhm.
like, oh my
Yeah.
God, because up until that point, I was still, because also as well, I'd been denying that I'd done this thing. I just kept saying I hadn't done it,
Yeah.
like a child would, like a baby's, no, I haven't done it, I haven't done it, because, I didn't, it was too painful to admit that I'd done it. So it's like, so my brain didn't even
Mhm.
acknowledge that I was lying. It just was like, I can't, yeah, extraordinary
Wow.
really when I think about it. But it didn't register that was, that this was me sort of petulantly lying like a little child. I just was like, I just don't want to admit that this is going on, but all on a subconscious level. So, it was, yeah, once I got to that point, I was like, okay, I'm in a serious position here. And I think after that legal pass and the lawyer had said to me, I don't think this is looking good for you, I actually started to think, oh gosh, I think I am actually going to lose. And then I started to go on to the NMC disciplinary. There's a website and it's all public information about why people have been struck off, what happened, da da da. And of course, I went down that rabbit hole, looked at all these cases, and just thought, this is it. I'm done. I'm over. And so,
Wow.
um, and
Mhm.
so they over the next 6 months, that was already 3 months in at this point, and over the next 6 months, they made me jump through hoops, and I just kept jumping. I was like, okay, I'll just do whatever it is that you want me to do. And I at every point that they, said do this, I said okay. And I think as well, I've spoken about this before with other people, that when I finally got to the hearing, which was 9 months after the initial incident, I was remorseful. I genuinely was like,
Yeah.
this thing has happened. I am really sorry this happened, full of shame and guilt and remorse. And I don't want this to happen again. And whilst at that point, I couldn't make any guarantees because I was very early on in my sobriety, I was making as much of the guarantees I could at
Yeah.
that point. I was basically saying, I will do my very best to not do this again. I really want to not do this,
Yeah.
and I want to not drink again. So, I could only give them what I was hoping would be the reality. But I think that did bode well for me. I think they saw there was a genuine aspect to that I was suffering, and that I hadn't done this just because I didn't care, because I rocked up and I was just like, I'm just like a party girl. I don't really give a monkeys about anything. I'm actually, genuinely, I've got a problem. I'm trying to deal with that medically, and I'm really very sorry.
And so obviously, because we're still here, they obviously probably gave you some sort of probation or something like that, or have you, and you were able essentially to keep your
Yeah.
license. So, let's talk about the infrastructure of kind of like building a new identity and even a new career that came after this downturn, right? So it's like, you went through this whole entire dilemma and you're subjected to almost losing your license. And finally, you can let us know like what they said were the stipulations. You don't have to go into that, but it's just a matter of like, how did you rebuild your life after? Like, what were the friends that you had to surround yourself with in order to not relapse? What were the environments you had to surround yourself with? And then after that point, how did you find yourself even finding your way into medical
Yeah.
aesthetics after that?
Yeah. So it was tough. There's no sugarcoating the process at all. So initially, restrictions were placed on my practice. I was told I could only work in a certain place on certain days. I couldn't do night shifts. I couldn't do this. I could only work so many hours. So there was a lot of restrictions placed on my practice, and there were people keeping an eye on me. I had to check in regularly with medical practitioners, and I had to attend, and demonstrate and prove that I was going to recovery groups and, all sorts of things. When I went back into the workplace initially, it's almost 13 years ago. I'll be 13 years sober on Sunday. And thank you so much. And when I first went in, I just felt like I'd got a neon sign that said, "This is what's happening. Look at me. I'm an alcoholic, and I'm trying not to drink." I was so self-conscious, so really, like, now as well, I've stripped away my crutch, the thing that I used to be able to kind of, get by. And now I'm like exposed and vulnerable, and oh God, all of that was going on. And so I felt like that people would be very judgmental about alcoholism. Like, it still had a lot of stigma attached to it back then. It was still very much like people went, "Oh my God," And so I didn't tell anybody, apart from one guy that we worked together, and I told him, and he was really sweet and used to help me if we went out. I'd stopped going out as well at this point. So I was, I had to get into some kind of new routines that when I went to work, I just went straight home. And it was like I had to do it in a very automated way. And I would remember going onto, coming out of the hospital, going to the tube station, getting on the tube, going to my house. And, you have to remember that prior to that, I would either go out after work, we'd either go to a pub or a bar, or I would come home, kick my shoes off, open the fridge door, and be pouring a glass of wine. So I had to not do either of those things. So this is new, right? I'm adopting new habits, and doing it without the thing that I used to do. So it's, it's kind of consciously coming home, sort of, putting the TV on or whatever it might be, do something that's not what I used to do. And, we know, don't we, that habits, you can form new habits after a few weeks, but, in those early days of doing that feels quite tough. So it was very much, I didn't tell anybody. It was my dirty secret. I felt like I was struggling with it by myself, as well as trying to, get to work, get back into the workplace, and deal with the fact that I'm also this newly sober woman. Like, there's a lot of that going on. And then obviously I was also separating from my husband at this point. I think when I got sober, I realized that relationship was no good for me, which was, one of the gifts of getting sober, was to really kind of go, "Oh my God, like what is happening?
What were they doing?
And so I've got that going on. And then on the social side of things, a lot of the friends that I had, I say friends, I had a big party. Yes, thank you. Exactly that. A big party scene of people that I was, this sort of, I don't know, just on the wild side, but I felt like I had loads and loads of friends. And then you realize actually not so much. And what those friends are associated with is just that social side of things. We're just all party people. That is very superficial, in fact. So, but I soon quickly realized that those relationships weren't any good for me. I have to step away from those, because what they're doing, those people, is they're trying to get me back into it, not deliberately, not to be horrible. They're not like nasty people like, "Oh, let's make you."
No, they're just like, "Hey, just one. It's not going to hurt," And that's how that stuff starts. People that are well-intentioned, but they don't understand how addiction works or
they're like, "Oh, just one. Oh, we miss you, Emma. Come on. Oh, you're so much fun. How are you going to live your life without a drink? What are you going to do? How long do you think this is going to last? Do you think you're going to be, should we just give it a lot?" So they don't think you're serious. They think that this is a temporary thing. Like, it's not a big actual life change moment. They think, "Oh, you're just going through a phase and you'll be back with them shortly," It's like, I know.
But imagine but it's like, with any habit, with anything, because it's like people, so any of you guys listening, is like, it's not just drinking. People are dealing with porn addictions. People are dealing with validation addiction. People are dealing with all sorts of
Yeah.
addictions that they may have gotten help for or may have not, right? And so it's just like replacing, and I love what you did. It's like, and this goes for anything. You had a habit and you said, what can I replace that habit with that's not going to put me
Yeah.
back on that
It's
path to crack,
exactly.
right?
I mean, and part of that was for me was to eat cake. I just ate a lot of cake, which is like obviously not good for you, but it's the thing that's, it's like do the thing that kills you last, right? So, now I don't eat as much cake.
Mhm.
I still eat a bit too much cake, but not every day. So like you have to do the thing that in that survival mode that's replacing that, because actually that's better for you than what I was previously doing. So it's about trying to sort of, just very tentatively get through that day in a way that's, in a way that means I don't drink or drug. It's like, let me just go to work, do what I got to do, come home, eat cake, and go to bed. Like that's it, and it really was just being really simple for quite a period of time. And I think about it, a good year or so was just focused on let me just go to work. Because you have to remember as well, Leslie, at the time I was thinking, well, this is it. This is my life over. I'm 38
Yeah.
and I'm like, my life is over. Like, it's the end. I'm never going to laugh again. I'm never going to enjoy myself again. I'm never going to have any fun. No one's going to like me. Nobody wants to be friends with me. I'm not the cool kid anymore. That's quite a hard one to deal with. Like,
Wow. Yeah.
my
I
identity
can
was
imagine.
really wrapped up in, going out, socializing, and really sort of that party girl image. A lot of that was me. That's who I was. And so now that's gone. So I'm also having to, rebuild my identity, a different identity, one that I don't really know. I don't know what I like at this stage. I don't know if I like the theatre. I don't know if I don't know what I like, So I'm having to discover all of
I
that as well, because my
know.
whole life has been consumed with these addictions that there was no space for anything else. Like now I can list off what I like, but I didn't know then. People say, do you like this? I go, I genuinely like,
Yeah.
I don't know,
Exactly. That's a genuine like rebuilding. And I think that's the interesting thing when when people are going through identity shifts, because for to go from one level of life or one thing to another, it requires an identity shift. And I think that's the hardest thing for humans to go through, because it's so bundled up in nerves and past experiences and triggers and all the things. It's just like, but when you're able to do that and get that support system around yourself, it's really amazing. So, I want to kind of move into that next phase. So you're sober, you're doing better, you're separated from the husband, eventually let your divorce. Congratulations for that too. It's like, I had a bad first one myself. I have a really great second one.
We get there eventually.
Oh, I empathize with you there, girl. And I'm sure a lot of our listeners like, yes, like, they've been there too, right? But, with you, and so you founded Emma Wedgwood Aesthetics in 2021. So I was like, 5 years ago or have you, and kind of like, worked your way up. So it was a dermatologist who actually got you into medical aesthetics. And at the time, you were like, it was a different identity for you. You were like, this is beneath me. Tell me about your original thoughts towards aesthetics and how that actually changed. Identity again, right?
Exactly that. So so basically, so I've gone back into, after I got sober, I've gone back to work and I'm in ITU and I'm doing that. And then I realized, I don't know if I like this job anymore. Like, this job is really demanding in terms of, there's long hours. And I found myself sort of, rather than wanting to be with the really sick, unwell patient, which I really wanted, the sicker the better in a lot of ways. Now I found myself like, actually, let me try and make their ITU stay a little bit more comfortable for the dying patient. I'm kind of, finding myself wanting to be in a slightly different part of the intensive care unit. And then after a while I realized, I don't think I like this. I don't like the working conditions. I don't like the hours. I don't like, and I think there's a shelf life with those kind of jobs. It's for the young people. I think I just reached that point, but I didn't know what else to do. I didn't know, really what other alternatives there were for someone like me. So I remember I was having my Botox done with a dermatologist, and I would go in and he said, hey, he'd say, why don't you come and think about doing this? And I was like, no, that's, leave me. Because I was like, I'm a serious, medical professional. I'm like saving lives. I'm just not going to do Botox now. What are you
Imagine.
talking about? And after a few
Mhm.
appointments, he said, I'd gone in for this one particular appointment and he did my Botox and he said, oh, what are you doing tomorrow? And I was like, I don't know what day off. He said, good. He said, there's an exhibition or there's a conference. He said, come with me, come and see what it's all about. And I said, okay. So I couldn't get
Mhm.
out because I already admitted that I'd got the day off. So we went along and it was eye-opening. I remember going in and thinking, oh wow, this isn't what I first thought it
Mhm.
was. And these people look very happy and they look
Mhm.
shiny, they look healthy. And, I was like, oh my goodness,
Mhm.
there's something going on here that I don't know anything about, but I like it. I like how it feels. I like how
Mhm.
they look. I want to be part of it. Suddenly, I find myself wanting to find out more, and yeah, I for the first time in a long time, I got a real buzz. I was like, oh my god, I like this, and so that kind of
Mhm.
kicked off my curiosity, and then I started to think, oh, I want a job. I would like to do this medical aesthetics, and then the next roadblock is that I don't know how to get into medical aesthetics. How do I transfer my ITU skills? Like, I don't know. And so I was at a bit of a rock and a hard place position because nobody would take me on with that experience, but I couldn't get experience. It's the classic kind of, I think things are different now, but back then, so it was, and then I was thinking, oh, well, maybe I'll just get a job in, GP surgery because they will, then I can get my prescribers, then I can do this. And my friend said, what are you doing? Do you want to work in a GP surgery? I said, no. She said, why are you applying then? I said, I don't know. She said, okay, stop. You sometimes need a really good friend that just says, okay, let's check them out for a second and
Yeah.
like actually look at what you're doing. And so we then started looking at the sorts of jobs that I might want to do, as in aesthetic nurse jobs. And eventually I was applying for different things, and there was a big national company that had lots of different clinics all over the country, and they had a part-time position going in I live in London and this was in Brighton, 2 hours away,
Mhm.
but I thought, go for it.
Mhm.
I'll just apply anyway, see what happens. Anyway, they gave me a job. They took a chance on me. They said, I haven't got any
Yeah.
experience. They said, okay, we'll train you. And I was like, okay. And I thought, it's not ideal, 2 hours away, blimey, but I was also, I wanted in, right? I was prepared to do anything. So I was like, okay,
Yeah.
this is my inroad. I'll take it. So I did, and I'm very grateful for them for doing that, actually. And then after about 3 months or so, the area manager said to me, Emma, do you live in London? I was like, yeah. He's like, okay, I got jobs in London. You want to come back to London? I was like, yes. So it was amazing.
That's
Well, it paid
amazing.
off that they were like, okay, let's get you back there. And so
Mhm.
I stayed with those guys for 3 or 4 years, and I ended up being their lead nurse in their Harley Street. Harley Street's the flagship clinic there, so I ended up
Yeah.
being there with them, and we had a big team, and 20 doctors, and so we had a mix of dermatologists, GPs, plastic surgeons, nurses, therapists, you name it, we were all there. And so I just learned the industry there. I went and learned it all and soaked it up and spent time in other people's clinics. I was back at the very beginning.
Mhm.
It was very basic. It was like doing an internship. I was like assisting these people, like handing them their
Yes.
gauze. I'm like, oh my God, this is, but also loving it because I was like listening to how they were consulting the patients, what they were talking about, the advice, and it was all very new to me. I'd been used to dealing with people that are acutely unwell, and now we're dealing with people who are coming in with very different complaints and concerns. And so yeah, it was new
Mhm.
but exciting to me. I liked it.
Yeah, and I think, what you said there, and I can imagine that's really the bedrock of your success. It's just like, being able to be in that position of
Yeah,
student again, and but in a practical way, because what we see many times is people, they go in for a weekend course or a 3-day course, and then they don't really get the opportunity to kind of do a
yeah,
practicum, so to speak, and observe and see how someone does a
yeah,
consultation over. And so it's almost like what you did is that you kind of went backwards to go forward, right? And I think so many people have ego around
yeah,
that. Again, identity. They don't want to go backwards and sacrifice, so
yeah,
then they go forward with
yeah,
so many mistakes, so many challenges. And I want to even get into that too, because I know that you have like, you're really big into safety. You're a safe-based accredited, practitioner or what have you. So if you could talk more about that too, about, well, in a minute, but it's just like, how that started your want to say, I can do this and I can do this differently, or I could do it the
Yeah.
Emma Wedgwood way. When did that like kind of like tinkling come about, and what made you want to do that versus just staying there?
So you're right that I had to really drop my ego and everything else. And, and at one point they had me doing like laser hair removal, like it was very boring. And, I was, oh my God, what am I doing? But I also understood and knew that this was, actually understanding that would lead to understanding the next thing, the next thing. So, there was a part of me that's just like, you know what, I'm just going to suck it up and do it. And I was with them guys
Mhm.
for, 3 or 4 years. And then I decided on a whim, I was talking to another doctor that I used to work with, and he'd left the company and was doing something different. And I decided that I would do the same. I mean, I'm laughing because I literally had no business acumen. I knew nothing about what was about to happen. And, in
Mhm.
naively, which I guess is, a godsend in some respects, just thought, oh, I'll just open this clinic of my own, and that'll be that. And I
Mhm.
think I worked in the NHS, which is very busy, where you just got people all the time. And then I'd worked in this very busy corporate chain of clinics. And so we had people all the time. And I
Mhm.
thought, oh, I'll just open up a clinic and the people will just keep coming. They're just going to come. I'm going to fling open the doors of Emma Wedgwood Aesthetics and I'm going to bomb an orderly queue around the corner,
Yes.
No, that's not what happened.
Mhm, mhm. That's yeah. What is it called? Expectations versus reality, right?
Yeah,
That's totally what
quite
happened.
honest.
Yes.
So that was, that was a massive reality check, I have to say. But it was in a way, what it stopped me from doing was not doing it. Does that make sense? I didn't get in my own way because I didn't
Mm,
know how difficult it was going to be in terms of the marketing, building up a patient base, building up a clinic, all of that stuff. I just hadn't
mhm.
even thought about it because I'd only worked in places where they were successful on that side of things in terms of the numbers. So I just thought, well, how hard can it be? So for the first time, I didn't get in my own way, which normally I would have done. So it was like, you know,
Yeah.
so that kind of ignorance served me in this case. So I just went
Mhm.
for it. I was like, okay,
Mhm,
going to do it, opened it up, and then obviously started experiencing all of the growing pains, all of the usual difficulties of a startup. And, suddenly you realize, oh, I've actually only got
mhm.
one patient booked in for the whole month, like, oh, okay, what's happening here? That wasn't the plan. And then, things started, I was like, okay. So, it then starts to become this slow process. And
Mhm.
yeah, and learning on the job. My God, did I start to learn? And you learn quick and
Yeah.
you learn stuff that you
Mhm.
didn't think you would have to learn. It's like, I didn't think that would.
Yeah.
I didn't think I'd have to know about that stuff. I didn't, and stuff that I'm not even particularly interested in sometimes. The marketing stuff, the admin stuff, that doesn't interest me, if I'm really honest, like, oh, thank you.
Yeah.
But I also understand on a business level that has to be done. That's part and parcel of having a
Mhm.
business and growing the business. Like it's a non-negotiable, right?
Exactly. And there's like, and now you're at like, more than one location. You have a team and things like that. And it's just like, so you understand. And then there's also obviously the power of delegation and outsourcing so that you can so there's of course there's a time for all of us when we're in the weeds, like doing every little thing that the business requires, right? And then there comes this moment. So like, oh, I have this excess, so I could reinvest it into hiring someone who will take this off my plate, right? And when that happens, for those of us who have ADD or whatever the D's, it's just like that is the biggest thing, right? And so with that, I do want to ask you a little bit more about, you know, how you've used your platform to give back, because me personally, I believe that business owners, because like small business owners and big business owners, it doesn't matter, they're business owners, right? Creating opportunities for yourself, your family, and for others. And I really love what you guys have done with the pro bono initiative for like
Yeah.
women who are in active recovery. And so Just tell us a little bit more about when you started that. Why is that so meaningful to you, and some of the change that's created in your community?
Yeah, thank you. It was, I think, so originally I was thinking about starting a women's community with a colleague of mine, and as it happened, we didn't in the end because she got pregnant and various other things, and we didn't pick it up. But when we were talking about stuff, I said to her, I really want to do part of, if we do this initiative or this community, or we build whatever it was, we didn't know really what it was at the time. We were trying to sort of figure it out, but I knew that what I wanted to do was within that do some pro bono work and have something that, you know, that we were able to offer women. In my case, I feel very passionate about newly stable women, like, and I knew I wanted to do this before I'd actually launch it, because I realized as well is that people have helped me in different ways for different reasons, and they've given me a leg up for, you know, just because they're kind and nice and they've done things. And so I realized that this was something that I could do in the giving back part, and actually I really wanted to, because I knew from my own experience and I understood in a way that you can't unless you've gone through it, what it means to feel and look like absolute crap. You know, when you've got no self-esteem, no self-worth, no self-confidence, you know, when you're really feeling totally rubbish about yourself, that, you know, and and often women in the, you know, not always, it's not every woman's story, but more often than not, women will have come out of abusive relationships. They find themselves, they've got children or whatever it is, they don't have a lot of money. Their access to funds tends to be more limited than the men that are getting sober. That's what I've seen, you know. And so, and also because as well, often when you're in addiction, you spend all your money on your drug of choice, whatever that is. These people, addicts, alcoholics, don't have savings or life plans or, you know, funds, index funds. You know, like this is foreign funny language, you know, like that the addict doesn't really understand. So they get sober, and often it's as a result of hitting a rock bottom. So that means that they're starting over in most cases. So that might mean a new job, a new, you know, whatever. There's a whole myriad of things that they've got to confront in a new way. And so when you're doing that and you're trying to sort of, you know, you've stripped the booze away, you stripped the drugs away, whatever it is, and now you're going out as this new person, back to the identity stuff, and you've got to, you know, you've got to do this, and present yourself. It's very difficult when you don't feel like your appearance looks great. And you have to remember that kind of level of addiction, substance abuse, will have and does take its toll on the body and your appearance, because all self-care goes out the window. Addicts aren't self-caring and putting a candle on and having a bath on a Sunday afternoon with their sheet mask. It ain't happening. You know, you're lucky if they're like brushing their teeth and washing their face, you know, once a day. Do you know what I mean? So it's a really, you know, that ability to be able to, you know, look after your skin, etc. You know, it doesn't exist. And so therefore, when you get sober, you haven't taken care of yourself, you don't look great. Usually, there are exceptions. I'm talking, you know, in blanket terms, and obviously there will always be exceptions to that. But so couple that with the idea that you don't have any money to be able to sort of invest in skincare, or, you know, and I'm not saying that a bit of Botox is the answer to everything in your, to, you know, in terms of giving you confidence. That's not what I mean. I sometimes think that, you know, people think that's what I'm saying, and I'm not. I'm saying that, but sometimes a little bit of Botox, a bit of skincare, a bit of something can make all the difference in terms of those little shifts, those little changes on the dial in terms of how you look can translate into confidence. And that's the important bit. That's the key to kind of, you know, that's the bit that I want to tap into, because that's the bit that I really understand. It's like when you are so, ooh, and you just want to, you know, it's like a, oop, that's the moment that I'm interested in. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's a big thing. And with that, it's like, at what level of recovery is someone in? Is it a matter of like someone, you know, is 1 month in, or is it like, they've had to be clean for a year? Like, what's your criteria to make sure that, you're giving it to someone who actually is taking themselves seriously to
Yeah, I mean,
change?
and that's a good point. You raise a good point there, because obviously, it's difficult, isn't it? Because I initially I didn't want to put criteria on it. I was like, anybody's welcome, and anybody, and then you realize actually you do have to be a little bit more selective, because there are people, and I did the same. I relapsed a few times before I got sober, right? So, it's sort of, trying to ensure that the person is serious and that they're on the road to recovery. That said, some will be. You can't know what's going to happen in the future, so I tend to just be a little bit like,
True.
okay, because I know people that have relapsed at 10 years sober. Like, I still go to recovery rooms. I know, and meetings. So I do see it, I hear it, So, so I'm also a little
Yeah,
bit like,
yeah.
actually, if someone just shows up and says, you know what, Emma, actually, I've got this job interview, or life isn't great, or whatever, I'm like, okay, let's see what we can do for you. So I've gone from having no criteria to then putting a bit in to going backwards again, So like, I just feel like if somebody's, I suppose, if they reach out, if they're brave enough, courageous enough to ask for help, because that's a really difficult thing to do, is to actually ask someone for help. Like, if somebody's able to do that, I'm like, okay, they're serious enough in their journey. And it might be that they don't get sober this time, maybe they don't, Leslie, but maybe they do the next time. Like, don't give up. Giving up is always the mantra, right? It's like, and maybe it's one step closer. So yeah, I tend to be more, if somebody is, interested, and they approach me, and usually I know their story at this point, then like, yeah, that they're welcome to come and join the clinic and benefit from the offerings that we have there. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, and everyone has their own ethos when it comes to those things, and so it's like the last thing I want to say, ask about that. So how the correlation between business and like I would say like social responsibility, like giving back. Like, do you like, what are your thoughts towards practices that don't do anything? Do you feel like this is something that every business should kind of like work in, like something, doesn't have to be that per se, but like something to show that as a company we're giving back to causes or things that we believe in, like, and how do you think that affects goodwill even with like patient
Yeah, I
perception?
mean, I hadn't really thought about what I think other clinics and other businesses should do, but I think, yeah, it can't hurt, right? I think if you are a business owner, if you are,
Yeah.
whether you've got a medical aesthetics business, or whether you've got a, I don't know, gym or something, if there is a small way that you can give back to somebody who's less fortunate for whatever reasons, if they're down on their luck and they've hit rock bottom for whatever the reason is, like we already kind of hinted at, there's a million and one different addictions, so it could be anything. So if somebody is suffering, and there's a business that can, just say, actually, we are going to portion this part of our money, whatever budget, to this to help someone, then yeah, if you can, why wouldn't you? That's my ethos. Like, why wouldn't you want to help somebody? So would I like to say everybody do it? Yeah, I suppose I would, really. I hadn't really thought about it, but yeah, why not? Like, if you've got a business and you're doing well and you're driving your Maserati or whatever you're driving, I think that's a car brand, then, like, why haven't played that up, then why wouldn't you? Do you know what I mean? But I guess it's an investment
Yeah.
of time as well, because that's the other. It's not just the financial side of doing this; it's the time. So because I allocate a certain amount of hours per month to do this. So it's that stuff. But look, I can honestly tell you that even though some people might say, oh, you're mad because you're giving away time and product and da da da, but the reward for that far outweighs what it is that you might, quote unquote, lose for providing this pro bono service. Like, I have women who have left me messages sobbing down the phone saying, I just want to tell you, Emma, that I went to a job interview today, I felt $1 million, and I got the job, and thank you. Like, that is gold. Like when someone tells you they're crying through joy because something wonderful happened, because you did a bit of Botox or a bit of filler or gave them a skincare routine. Like, you just can't, I can't explain how that makes you feel. Like, it's magic. It's magic. And and I always say to them, And they're like, thank you, I can't thank you enough. I said, you will, you'll help somebody else. You'll pay that forward when your moment comes. It might not be Botox. It might be, I don't know, who knows what it might be. But I'd like to think that this person will remember this moment, and they will, and my moment came when a lawyer helped me because I was getting divorced and I had no money, and they didn't charge me any fees. Like, so like, so there are things that, that person helped me, and I go, and I've never forgotten it. Do you know what I mean? Because it meant the difference between me being able to divorce versus not being able to divorce. And, it meant that I could start my life again. And so, I want to be able to help somebody if it means you getting a job or not getting a job. And it's not about how you look, right, necessarily, but it's about how they feel, how they go into the job interview. So if they feel a bit better, they're more likely with their confidence to do better in the interview and hopefully get the job. So that's the meaningful part.
I love that. I love that. Because I mean, at the end of the day, it is a transfer of energy. It's a transfer of a feeling. And if you're able to give that to someone who maybe doesn't have that belief in themselves, and they can get a little bit of that to say and go into the next thing that's going to bring them closer to a different identity that's going to help them in their lives. That's all. That's the win,
because I can
right?
see it in them. Because I can see that. Sorry, I can see that in them. They're at the beginning of their journey, feeling like this is the end, and I'm like, this is the beginning, my friend. Like, you don't know this yet because you're at the beginning. You haven't got that experience. You haven't walked that path yet to know and understand that this is the beginning of your life. It's the next chapter. And so, like, so to be able to kind of, get them going on that road is like, yes, I can see that you're going to do okay. You just need to trust that I'm helping you, because I know that I see something in you that you don't see in yourself.
Yeah, that borrowing belief is what we call that, borrowing belief. And I love that. You borrow the belief until you get some of your own, and then it becomes a self-generating thing, and then you could pass it forward. And I think that's so beautiful. So the last thing I want to leave our listeners with is, like, for someone listening who's in the middle of rebuilding, not necessarily from addiction, but from any version of like losing themselves, what do you want them to hear?
Oh, a few things, I suppose. But number one is that it's going to be okay. You're going to be all right. I have a very firm, strong belief in no matter what happens to me now, you can throw all sorts at me and I'll be okay. I've built resilience in a way that I didn't know was possible. And I exercise that today in a way that I never thought I would. Like, there's like a newer version of me. I'm still me. I haven't had a personality transplant or anything like that, but there's a new version of me that's able to kind of really go through life in a way. We mentioned at the beginning about the self-limiting beliefs and the narrative and the stories and the voices, and they used to sit at sort of at what I'd call a 9 out of 10, and now they're at a 1 or a 2 out of 10. They're still there, but nowhere near as much. And so I'm able to go forward in life in a way that I didn't know was possible for someone like me. So, it's transformational. But the point is that anything's possible. Anything is possible. As humans, and particularly women, we are brilliant, and we can honestly achieve great things. Like, if you're just able to tap into that feminine energy, get a good support system around you, get some really good women friends around you. If you can do that, the sky's the limit, honestly. I'm a big believer in that.
I love that. Wow. This is a great conversation. Emma, thank you so much for your time. And for those of you, if you want to connect with Emma, everything about her is going to be in the show notes as usual. But until next time,
thank you so much, Lizzie. Very, very glad to be here. Thank you.
Want more clarity like this? Join the Branded Practice newsletter community. I write about strategy, systems, and brand leadership straight to your inbox. Go to diamondhandsmedia.com to sign up. And if this episode hit, share it with someone still building without a brand. This is the Diamond Hands Podcast. Thanks for listening. Now go lead.